Welcome back, 8th graders. Let's jump right into today's explainer because honestly, we're unpacking some of the absolute most powerful truths you're ever going to encounter. We're looking at Romans chapter 5 today, so get ready because we're talking about a bridge, a massive power up, and literally the ultimate training ground for your life. Let's get started. So, have you ever had a falling out with a best friend? You know, that incredibly heavy, just awkward feeling where you're sitting in the exact same room, but it feels like there's a million-mile canyon between the two of you? That feeling of separation is just awful. Well, I want you to multiply that feeling, kind of blow it up, because spiritually speaking, that is exactly what sin did to humanity. It completely separated people from God. It created this impossible gap that we could never ever cross on our own. So you might be wondering, how on earth does that massive canyon between us and God actually get fixed? Well, that brings us right to section 1, building the ultimate bridge. To really understand this bridge, we first have to tackle a pretty big theological term, justified by faith. Now, I know it sounds like some super complex, heavy seminary word, but it's actually beautifully simple. Being justified by faith simply means being made completely right with God by trusting in Jesus. It's that exact split-second moment when we are no longer separated. We aren't just, merely tolerated by God anymore. We're brought completely back into a right, loving relationship with Him. And this leads us perfectly to our memory verse for today. Romans 5 verse 1 says, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ." Really think about the absolute weight of that statement. We have peace with God. Because of your faith in Jesus, the war is entirely over. The separation, it's finished. You literally have true, lasting peace with the Creator of the universe. I really want to challenge you right now to visualize this. Picture a massive, completely impossible canyon. Now imagine a bridge, shaped exactly like a cross, dropping right down over that gap, perfectly connecting people back to God. Jesus is that ultimate bridge. He is the one who completely solved the massive problem of sin that was keeping us apart. Moving on to section 2, grace is your power source. Now, here's the thing. Once you cross that bridge, you still have a whole life ahead of you to actually live. And a lot of people have this massive misunderstanding about grace. They kind of think it's just a free pass, permission to just keep messing up and continuing in sin because God's going to forgive you anyway, right? Actually, scratch that. The truth is, grace is a massive spiritual power-up. It's a real resource designed to help believers stand, grow, and obey. Through Jesus, you receive full access to God's mercy, His Spirit, and the actual, literal power you need for your daily journey of faith. So I want to ask you this. Why is access to this grace so incredibly important after you're born again? Really think about it. Crossing the bridge is just the very beginning. To endure, to actually make good choices when literally everyone else around you is making bad ones, to live a life that truly pleases the Father, well, you just can't do that on your own strength. You desperately need this spiritual resource every single day. All right, let's look at section 3, finding hope in hard times. Let's be totally real for a second here. Life as an 8th grader, it isn't always easy. But let's see how this all builds together, because Paul gives us this absolute masterpiece of a spiritual equation right here in Romans 5. It starts with step 1, tribulation. Now that's really just a fancy word for difficulties and hard times. But check this out. Those hard times actually produce step 2, perseverance, which is the sheer ability to stick with it. And sticking with it, that produces step 3, character, which fundamentally changes who you are from the inside out. And finally, that deep-tested character ultimately produces step 4, hope. It's like God uses our difficulties as this intense training ground to really build up our spiritual muscles. I really want to reassure you today, just because you're going through difficult things does absolutely not mean God has abandoned you. Suffering is never easy, for sure, but God has a very specific, deliberate purpose in it. When you just continue trusting Him, God uses those very trials to significantly strengthen your surrendered faith and your obedience. He's literally treating you like an elite athlete in a training ground, preparing you for something great. Which brings us to section 4, God's unstoppable love. We really have to ask ourselves, where does all this peace and grace and hope actually come from? Like, why would God do all of this for us in the first place? Well, the answer is right there in our bonus verse for the week, Romans 5, verse 8. But God demonstrates His own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Guys, this is just mind-blowing. God didn't sit around waiting for us to completely clean up our act. He didn't wait for us to be perfect, well-behaved students. No, Christ died for the ungodly while we were actively rebelling against him. This absolutely proves that salvation begins entirely with God's incredible, overwhelming mercy, and definitely not with our own human pride or goodness. And just look at how perfectly this all works together. Through Jesus' death, we are completely reconciled to God, right? That's that ultimate bridge we talked about earlier. But then through his resurrection and his life, he actually brings us hope and actively helps us walk in obedience. Because he lives, we can be totally 100% confident in God's faithfulness to us every single day on our daily salvation journey. And this brilliant setup leads us into our final section, Section 5, the Godly Learner Philosophy. This is exactly why what we're learning today is so absolutely vital for your actual real-world education here from Monday through Friday. See, HeroesMart Academy intertwines biblical morality with education for a very specific reason, because education without morality can actually hurt. Knowledge and intelligence, they should help you make wise, God-honoring choices, rather than just simply making you more capable. Think about it. If you just get smarter and smarter, but you don't have a solid moral compass based entirely on God's truth, you can easily end up using that intelligence for the absolute wrong things. And this is exactly what we expect of you. We want you to be a godly learner. Now, a godly learner is a student who pursues serious academic excellence. You work hard at your math, your science, your reading, but you do it all while keeping your mind entirely centered on God, on truth, on wisdom, and on making righteous choices. You're intentionally intertwining your schoolwork with those exact spiritual resources, that grace, and those character-building tools we just unpacked from Romans 5. So why do we push this so hard? Well, Romans 8, verses 6 and 7 teaches us that keeping the mind spiritually minded leads to life and peace. If you truly want to experience real, abundant life and that incredibly deep peace we talked about at the very beginning of this lesson, you just have to keep your mind fixed on the things of the Spirit as you go about all your studies. So, 8th graders, I want to leave you with this final, incredibly important question. Will you pursue excellence today with a mind totally centered on God? Will you actually take this grace, this massive spiritual power-up, and apply it directly to your life, to your friendships, and to your studies today? You've got the bridge, you've got the power, and you are right here in the training ground. The only question left is, how are you going to live it out today? Thanks for hanging out with me for this lesson, and I'll see you next time.